and incited violence against fellow lawmakers.
Here she is, armed with a deadly assault rifle, pointing it toward 3 Democratic members. And some people who wanted to give other people a nightmare committed sedition and broke into the House of Representatives and tried to stop us electing a president of the United States.
America is the greatest country in the world.
A staunch supporter of Donald Trump. Before she was elected, Marjorie Taylor Greene posted unfounded far-right QAnon conspiracy theories online. The Georgia representative also harassed high school shooting victims, having claimed and then retracted that the attacks were staged. Bipartisan pressure to punish Greene had been building since Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell called Greene's loony lies a cancer for the party. Though House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and others from the Republican leadership blasted the action, saying it shattered congressional precedent.
Welcome back to the Magnolia Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero. And, well, you heard it there. That was just one example of the many, many calls to violence made by MAGA supporters of Donald Trump. We're going to play some more clips for you here in just a few moments. But before that, let's get into it.
As we face the most recent crisis in the United States, that of course being the shooting on Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania, Democrats are going to feel the effects of this and again harken back to what should Biden be doing? Should he be preparing to wind it all down and call it a day and call for a brokered convention? But first, we have to deal with the cries and shouts and the overall pathetic nature of these MAGA caucus members. And let's face it, all of the Republican Party is MAGA now. Even if they don't believe it, they'll do it for political expediency. They'll buy into those lies, to that nonsense, and to that outright dangerous rhetoric. Oh, and by the way, in that earlier clip I played of French 24 English version talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, she was, of course, holding an AR-15 and all of the campaign commercials being played in the background. In fact, when's the last time you can remember a Republican politician running for office that wasn't firing, carrying, or just displaying his or her gun collection? Guns are essential to Republican politics as the NRA has more or less propped them up. Well, it appears, based on new reporting, that Russia may be as supportive of the MAGA caucus and the MAGA mindset of populism, of being essentially hermits on the world stage. That, of course, to weaken NATO and allow Russia to try to take back the Baltic states and, of course, further their war in Ukraine. So we do have traitors amongst us. Make no mistake about it. Traitors who want a dictator. Traitors who want to impose their religious beliefs, their hateful religious beliefs on everyone else. They want a handmaid's tale for women in this country. Well, except for, of course, their wives, their daughters, their mistresses. That'll be fine with them. They'll take that. That's no problem. All of this makes me hearken back to the tragic election in Tennessee in 2018 when we elected an extremist MAGA governor named Bill Lee because the circumstances around the Republican Party, a once stable and thoughtful party, a party that brought us Eisenhower, a party that brought us George H.W. Bush, probably the only two sympathetic figures in the Republican Party in the last century, has been essentially turned to brain mush, brain rot. And that's why we must be sure that we are defeating them. In 2020, there was no doubt President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris were rolling over Donald Trump with a 9-point lead at this point back in 2020. Biden's facing nearly the same deficit versus Trump this go-round. So, we can be certain of a couple of things. Biden is not as strong a candidate as he was in 2020. And for Christ's sake, why would anyone want this job until they're 86 years old? Especially for a man who has a family. I encourage President Biden to go be that grandfather, to go be that consistent rock that every family needs. A role that's often occupied by a grandparent, especially a grandfather who was 37 years a United States Senator, 8 years a Vice President, and 4 years President of the United States. The stakes are just too high. And that's why we have to rethink this thing. And we have to be willing to play dirty and say these things. That violence begets violence, and the violent rhetoric surrounding the MAGA brain rot, for lack of a better term, brain rot, MAGA brain rot, as if they're selling it for 99 cents down at the local dollar store. It seems that everyone in middle America who's white, over the age of 60, and leans on rightward-leaning media like the propaganda spewed on Fox News and Newsmax, has a violent streak, one that they are not afraid to flex. This all takes me back to the 2017 White Power rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, when a young counter-protester named Heather Heyer lost her life. She was there protesting peacefully the repulsiveness of Donald Trump. Only this time around, Donald Trump will use the National Guard against us when we attempt to fight back. So no sympathy. Do not hold back. I'm ashamed Biden even canceled his ads the evening the shooting took place. Trump was not the one mortally wounded. We don't even know what exactly went down. Let the investigation happen first, Joe, before you and your campaign staff pull your spines out and lay them on the ground next to Trump's feet. Because you're not doing anything to win this race. Except now you've ceded the high ground to a madman who, in his own way, is trying to pivot to the middle, but only for a short time, only long enough to try to get through this election. And once that's happened, well, we'll see the same old son of a bitch we've seen a million times before. A man who won't stop talking and won't stop taking the advice of people like Stephen Miller, who looks like he just finished draining the blood out of his last victim. Dracula reference. And trying to reshape this country in the mold of something it never was. A fantasy. They want 1920s brought back in the 2020s. They want to go back 100 years to a time before women could vote in 1919. They want to go back to a time before black people were allowed to vote in this country. I heard MAGA supporters say it the other day in an interview on MSNBC, speaking to MSNBC reporters, saying that they don't believe certain people in this country really have a legitimate right to vote, and that it would be a better country if they weren't allowed to vote. And remember some of those comments, some of those lovely comments Trump had about liberals and progressives in this country? Let me refresh your memory. He said the same thing, of course, about immigrants, which have been the scapegoat for the MAGA regime, for the MAGA mind virus that seems to have invaded the brains of so many millions of our fellow Americans. We don't remember? Do we just forget? Or does a significant portion of America actually buy into this bullshit? Serious question. It's becoming clear that more and more of America, especially in the hardest hit rural areas, the areas with the lowest overall IQ, where it takes 10 people to get an IQ high enough to attend public school in the state of New York, they don't even realize. They don't realize what's coming at them. And we will not offer any safe harbor for that type of nonsense, for that type of violence, for that type of hate. There is no such thing as an illegal human being, and the phrase illegal alien portends that there is one. They're just undocumented migrants. That's it. The only difference between them and anyone else is they don't have some piece of paper that says they're deserving. Well, they are deserving. They're deserving in every way you and I are deserving. As American citizens, this is supposed to be the shining city on the hill. And whatever happened to the whole compassionate conservative line of bullshit? It was just that when it was said. Bullshit. These are the same people who've allowed the CIA to overthrow democratically elected governments. The 1980s was a real run on them. El Salvador, Guatemala. Yet, people still stand and vote for them because so many Americans aren't interested at all in politics until 6 weeks before an election. So that's where we find ourselves. 114 days, whatever it is, out from a presidential election. We need to be far more prepared than this. We need to be willing to go to the mattresses. Say what you have to say, or we'll be facing this in January of 2025.
You know, when they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country. When they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world, not just in South America, not just the 3 or 4 countries that we think about, but all over the world. They're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia, all over the world. They're pouring into our country.
So everyone who wants to come to the United States to escape political persecution, gang violence, starvation, an opportunity to improve the circumstances for their children, they're not even thinking about their own lives anymore, but they're, quote, poisoning the blood of our country. And they're not just coming from the 3 or 4 countries we typically think about. Of course, he's talking about Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. He's talking now about nations in Africa, because there are migrants who are making it all the way from Africa to escape the violence in countries like Somalia or Sudan. And they're making their way into Central and South America, walking across Mexico. Think about a dangerous journey. Coming to our borders and seeking refuge. So, to tie this whole thing together, starting with those reports you heard at the beginning of the show about Marjorie Taylor Greene and wrapping it up with the comments from convicted felon Donald Trump, no one at this podcast, at this network, or for that matter, at any liberal outlet that I've seen or heard ever in my life, and I've been a liberal activist, or at the very least, a liberal voter for 22 years, and I've never heard the type of thing that might have come out of the mouth of a fat, bloated pig like Rush Limbaugh, or another fat, bloated pig like Donald Trump. I've never heard that in my life from Democrats, be them moderates, progressives, liberals, whatever. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm the president of Wokistan. That's not what I'm getting at all. All I'm saying is that they can go to hell if they think we're going to let up on the pressure that needs to be placed on these people ahead of the 2024 election because a gunman took off a little piece of convicted felon Donald Trump's ear. Oh, and expect for that head to be wrapped up with so much tape and gauze and to play this thing up. And I seriously doubt that Trump will even mention one of his own supporters who he hates. And he's made it clear that he hates you. If you're a MAGA supporter, he hates you and finds you repulsive. But like any salesman, he feels like a sucker is born every day, and he has proven that old adage to be true. As 45% of the country seems to be more than willing to vote for this monster and moron, who, by the way, is only 3 years younger than Joe Biden, and if Biden should step down, then so should Trump, because Trump also has the comorbidities to go along with being a very, very old man to be going into what would essentially be a dictatorship. If we're going to have a dictator, I'd rather have the benevolent dictator and Joe Biden than the tyrant and Donald Trump. But enough on that. As we move our focus now to the absolutely corrupt, politically motivated, and illegitimate Supreme Court of the United States. Recent reporting this from the Washington Post, saying that Clarence Thomas, caught again not reporting gifts handed out to him by Harlan Crow, took a private yacht all the way to Russia, I guess on vacation, then didn't declare that he was loaned a helicopter for a private flight out to St. Petersburg, to a palace in St. Petersburg, the hometown of, you guessed it, the Republicans' second favorite idiot, Vladimir Putin. I will say this, Putin is certainly not as, well, stupid as Donald Trump. At least he has some control over what does or doesn't come out of his mouth. But make no mistake, he is a vicious dictator. And we have a Supreme Court justice warming up to Vladimir Putin, staying at a palace likely owned by Vladimir Putin. As a dictator, he's been able to just step in and take over major industry throughout Russia. It's a disgrace. A disgrace. And we as liberals, we as progressives, we as moderate to conservative Democrats, we who truly believe in the rule of law and who believe in some structure in our government, those of us who have faith that this country can only get better, people who are truly optimistic about what America could be, cannot risk a Donald Trump or a MAGA majority in the House or the Senate, maybe ever again. It'll be a long time before people like Marco Rubio are completely gone. In states like Florida, come around, because these places are beginning to fill up and be concentrated with people moving from states that are perceived to be Democratic or liberal, whatever, and they're fleeing to places like Knoxville, Tennessee, to places like Central Florida, to places like, you name the spot, Idaho, Wyoming, whatever. You're seeing big spikes in population growth. Both ways. Liberals are leaving red states and Republicans are leaving blue states. No longer would a conservative Trump supporter even consider dating or marrying someone who would consider themselves a liberal Biden supporter or a liberal Obama supporter. Speaking of Obama, and speaking on Joe Biden for a moment as we pivot away from idiocy to sort of a thoughtful and structured conversation we're having around what to do about President Biden moving forward. And I think ultimately this is going to require a visit from the most popular man in the Democratic Party, former President Barack Obama. Now, there have been a lot of jokes and a lot of speculation made about Michelle Obama and the fact she would absolutely demolish Donald Trump if she were to decide to enter the race. If Biden stepped aside and they had some sort of a mini primary ahead of the convention. She's not going to do it. She hated what Washington, D.C. did to her family. What politics has meant to her has been, well, something different than what it's meant to any of the rest of us. She had to raise a family and take care of 2 little girls while her husband was bashed on a daily basis, was attacked based on his race on a daily basis. He was black, therefore he can't be legitimate president of the United States. Right, racists? I mean, we have to remember the man blowing the dog whistle for the racist was convicted felon Donald Trump. In all fairness, back then he was just Dementia J. Trump. Now he's convicted felon Donald J. Trump. So, we have to pick from this incredible bench Democrats have. We are so fortunate as a party at this moment to have Gretchen Whitmer, to have Josh Shapiro, to have Gavin Newsom, to have the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, to have all of these excellent Democratic choices, and to be going down the stretch with a man who will be 86 years old at the end of his second term if he were to win it, and it does not appear he's going to be able to win it. Now, I don't want to sell Joe Biden short because he has surprised a lot of people a lot of times, and he's pulled out wins, whether it's been in the Senate or the 2012 election. He's proven us wrong time and time again, but this time he seems to be boxed in. And that stunt in Butler, Pennsylvania didn't help. However, I do believe whomever the Democratic candidate is will win the state of Pennsylvania. I do believe that we liberals in particular who really don't watch cable TV anymore or have traditional phones that or bother answering unknown numbers or some pollster's number, that the polling data, the polling samples these days has to skew 8 to 10 points more Republican than Democrat. Because again, Republicans are 60-plus-year-old white men and women without any college experience whatsoever. That's who makes up this party. And I didn't finish college, but that doesn't mean I'm an absolute twit. Now, back to the Supreme Court for a moment. I think with the new ruling made by the Supreme Court using their rules, President Biden, he should find it incumbent to do something about this court. Sit down with his legal team and figure out exactly how to dissolve the current Supreme Court. with whom to replace them. Perhaps the D.C. Circuit? The D.C. Court of Appeals, rather? That seems logical, so why not go that route? Because again, something has to be done. We're running out of time, and this election cycle, which may very well be the last election cycle that's a free and fair election that will be held in the United States of America. This may be the last year we see protests that don't involve live bullets. And speaking of protests and live bullets, as the crocodile tears run down the faces of the cold-blooded creatures that call themselves Republicans, remember how they supported Kyle Rittenhouse, who cold-blooded murdered 2 white people at a Black Lives Matter march, and I believe it was Wisconsin, after being driven there by his mother. He found a partial trial court judge who pushed a narrative that Rittenhouse was in some way defending himself despite being 17 years old on the street with an AR-15 strapped to his back, fired into a crowd and killed 2 people, and he's on his way to Congress one day soon. Sort of like Ronnie Jackson. And Ronnie Jackson, you can go directly to hell too, my friend. You alcoholic degenerate. That's the type of language, that's the type of attitude, the type of mindset, the type of intensity necessary to match what's going on the right, but to match it with good ideas, with ideas of peace and camaraderie, because the most divisive subject in the United States is party politics. It's what Donald Trump has helped exacerbate. It existed before Trump, but it's gotten violent now. As we see liberal people being attacked, we see people just standing in parking lots being harassed by Karens, almost uniformly Republican-leaning Karens, who want to know what you're doing here. And then they end up getting arrested. We see the videos all the time talking about the Karens. And we have male Karens too. I guess Kevins. I don't know what else to call them. But it's become exhausting. And it's become this exhausting grind of dealing with this day in and day out. And now on top of it, we have to deal with the fact a Republican tried to kill the Republican nominee for president. We have to deal with the fact Clarence Thomas, a truly evil and despicable creature, took a private yacht all the way to Russia, then a private chopper all the way to a palace in St. Petersburg, most likely owned by Vladimir Putin himself. It would be bad enough if it was a Russian oligarch, but it's likely Vladimir Putin himself because, after all, St. Petersburg is his town. I'm really at a loss for words about where we are at this moment in the United States. I've dated several women in my life who identify as conservative or who vote Republican on the same day in the same election site where I'd go into a booth and pull the lever for a Democrat, they'd go into a booth and pull it for a Republican. Now, some of that was just out of the lack of mating options. There were very, very few, and still are very, very few, liberal Democrats in the town where I grew up. Now, where I live at this current moment is about 45, 50 miles away. It's just west of downtown and is much more liberal, not liberal compared to, let's say, East Nashville or Memphis, but liberal enough where, there's a 60-40 chance the people I pass on the sidewalk in my neighborhood are liberal, if not flat out progressives. We are under attack, and it's not just liberals and progressives and Democrats, but it's anyone who doesn't fully support this MAGA agenda, this myth-based God that they want everyone to pray to, because it creates subserviency. It gives them permission to impose their own versions of slavery. You have people like Clarence Thomas who honestly believe that the lives, the personhood of someone who is wealthy or owns businesses or is the CEO of those businesses is actually worth more as a human being than someone who works their tail off for a living. And this is supposed to be the Supreme Court justice of the common man. Has there ever been a bigger line of BS than Clarence Thomas is the justice on the Supreme Court who best represents the common man? No, that would be Elena Kagan or Judge Sotomayor or Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. It certainly would not be the ignorant bastard that is Clarence Thomas or the treasonous bastard that is Samuel Alito. And I'm not afraid to come on and use that kind of language because that's who they are. That's who they are. That's who they've chosen to be, and they have chosen to essentially wave the two-finger salute at the American public and say there's nothing you can do about it because there is no provision in the Constitution. However, in ignoring the Constitution, they opened up a back door for a Democratic president, Joe, to do something about their lack of loyalty to the United States as a concept, as an ideal. Voting away the powers of the EPA so that polluters can finish off the job that they started all those years and decades ago, and over this next 5-year period entrench what's becoming the new norm because of climate change. This is the last 5 years we'll have, according to most climate scientists, to do something significant about weaning ourselves off fossil fuels. To hell with the Saudis, to hell with the Qataris, to hell with the Emiratis, to hell with the Iraqis, to hell with them, to hell with Chevron and Exxon. That's not the backbone of the American economy anymore anyway. It's tech. It's the tech sector. Google, Apple, and Nvidia. Those are your three biggest companies. It's not General Motors and General Electric and Exxon anymore. No, those aren't exactly little baby companies or companies that are being bought up because they're in some weak financial position. No. That's not the case at all. But it is the case that American industry has taken a hard turn away from those old-fashioned, dirty, gritty businesses. And it's time we start working overtime to either bring in nuclear energy to this country and for liberals to get behind it 100% because it's clean. We find ways to store the spent nuclear material. We've done it in the past. And the couple of accidents that have occurred, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima in Japan, those incidents have turned so many people away from what is a really stable power source. But it takes a long time to get a nuclear power plant up and online. We need to be doing it today and not cowering to the billionaires and the petroleum industry or the natural gas industry or the just anti-green anything because it hurts our profit margin industry. They're the tobacco companies of the 21st century. They're killing off people. They know they're killing off people. And instead of doing anything about it, they're paying off politicians to sabotage any legislation that might come along to rein them in. The same thing's happening with Instagram, which is telling teenage girls to commit self-harm, or their algorithm is leading young girls who are having body image issues and showing them a noose or a razor blade in the very next clip that they're shown. These algorithms are designed to create this division. And then add on a Donald Trump nationalist, Christo-fascist on top of that. A Christo-fascist who can't name 5 books in the Bible. Add a Christo-fascist like that on top of our society, and now we've got division layered on top of division, layered on top of division, and I have no idea how to go back and fix it. You've heard here that I am so staunchly against everything they stand for that I wouldn't hold back even on the Tuesday after the weekend in which someone attempted to take the life of Donald Trump. We don't have time to cross our arms and nod our heads, because if it were the other way around, Trump would take to a stage and be bragging and screaming and yelling and laughing about, we just needed another quarter of an inch. That's what he would say. If Biden had been nicked in the ear with a bullet, that's what he would say. And because of these fissures and divisiveness in our society, don't expect for this to be the last little bit of political violence we see. Every campaign rally, Democratic, Republican, whatever RFK Jr. claims to be, could become violent. Likely will become violent. You take all of those assault weapons being sold in the United States to 18 to 20-year-olds, and take all of the unstable people out there, the massive drug problem we have in the United States, the massive wealth inequality we have in the United States, the lack of opportunity for young people other than to go to college that might or might not produce a job, to go and pursue a master's degree that will more likely provide them with a job, but will put them in the hole financially till they're 60, so they have no chance of starting a family or buying a house. You take a society that's so downtrodden, then add to it the gasoline that is 400 million weapons and growing, and more of them becoming assault weapons, not defensive weapons that someone might keep in a bedside table or in a gun safe, so that if something goes bump in the night, they have something other than a baseball bat with which to defend themselves or their families. And I understand that. I appreciate that. I'm a gun owner myself. But what's happening in the United States now, with these traitors taking trips to go hang out with Vladimir Putin, Tucker Carlson, with people like Samuel Alito, and his appeal to heaven flag, showing that he's obviously sympathetic with the January 6th insurrectionists, the insurrectionists who were 100% wrong for what they did. They were lied to. There was no widespread voter fraud, and the few cases of voter fraud that were caught by Republicans trying to vote in multiple districts or in multiple states. That's where we are, and I don't know what to do about it. It's scary, it's overwhelming, but I do know we have to move on. President Biden, we have to move on. I implore you to retire. At the very least, turn it over to Kamala Harris and let us win or lose. Let this democracy hold or fail based on her ability to lead the party. Or let's take Jim Clyburn. Jim Clyburn, you know, the guy who got you elected in 2020, who got you through the Democratic primary when you were getting beaten up by Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg. Remember him? Clyburn had the idea of a mini primary among the delegates. Let them vote and select from, say, a group of 4. My 4 would be Gavin Newsom, because, as Anthony Scaramucci said on Prof G Markets podcast last week, Trump fears Gavin Newsom, who's a full 6'3", who's incredibly handsome, who's well put together, who is willing to go into the lion's den on Fox News and answer questions hurled at him by Sean Hannity and embarrass Hannity. Imagine what he would do to Trump, because Hannity, the buffoon he is a lot smarter than Donald Trump, or Trump wouldn't have been calling him for advice. So, Gavin Newsom, Shapiro, Kamala Harris, and let's throw in Gretchen Whitmer. There's our bench. That's our A-team. Those are the first guys off the bench. And at this point, they're probably better for the team than our current president, than our current leader, than the head of our party, and Chuck Schumer, and Dick Durbin, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee. What are you doing, sirs? What is Dick Durbin doing? Just hoping the Supreme Court will adopt a code of ethics on its own? Why not subpoena the liberal justices if the conservative justices won't come? Let's at least get a first-hand account of what in the hell is going on behind the scenes there. Bring in Justice Jackson, Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan. Let's figure this thing out. Let's figure out what's going on so we can figure out how to remedy it. And I hate to end the show on a low note, but I really don't know what else to say or do about what's going on in the United States today, what's happening with our political system, what's happening with our political leaders, what's happening across the board, other than Republicans are now trying to kill Republicans, which is no surprise to anyone who's paid attention to anything over the last, decade. And even MSNBC, or what is perceived to be liberal media, and there is no liberal media in the United States, not liberal network legacy media, none. What is perceived to be acting as if they're absolutely astonished by these revelations that there was political violence in the Republican Party. Rebut every conspiracy theory that tries to tie this to Democrats, liberals, progressives, every time you can. Every time they say it's because you called him a fascist or a wannabe dictator, that's why he got shot at. First of all, we'll never know, because that young man is dead. And no, it isn't. And we're going to continue to do it because it is simply true. Just like God's a myth, then every one of these Congress people and senators on the right who claim to have some relationship with their God are false prophets. So we have mythology and false prophets. We have thuggery. We have divisiveness. And we have violence. This is not a good recipe, folks. We have to find a better way forward. We have to. And again, I wish I could say something motivational. I wish I had it in me to say, well, the door is open for the Democratic Party, for the Democrats to step through it and seize the moment, as whether Republicans want to admit it or not, they are in complete disarray. And with Jesse Waters saying, let's not focus on his political affiliation or his registration. Imagine if that young man had been a registered Democrat. I wonder if Jesse Waters would pay any attention to that. Of course he would. He wouldn't shut up about it, because he's a backbencher who made it onto the air at Fox News because everyone else got run off and fired, either for saying terrible things about the network, Tucker, or for sexually harassing women for decades, Bill. That's where Jesse Waters, the little worm, the little weasel that he is, made his way on to Fox News. And having said that, the next scheduled Magnolia Media podcast is on Thursday. It'll be available at midnight Thursday morning. Or if you're a normal person who's not listening to podcasts at those hours, it'll be available to you first thing Thursday morning. Until then, Thank you for tuning in to the Magnolia Media Podcast. Please like, follow, subscribe, and leave a review. It goes a long way. And if you want to support this liberal media network coming out of the southeastern United States from the eye of the storm through the lens of a southern liberal, from southern liberals, it's not just me, there's a few of us here. As we try to expand, consider becoming a member at patreon.com/Magnolia Media Network. Again, that's patreon.com/Magnolia Media Network. And be sure to follow me on Instagram and Threads at MagnoliaJohn2024. A lot of exciting videos from my trip to New York, which was heavenly. Heaven. It was heaven for someone like me, raised around all of these batshit crazy conservatives. Anyway, again, the next scheduled Magnolia Media Podcast will be on Thursday morning. Be sure and check it out. That is, considering and hoping that my throat doesn't get any worse. I'm not sure what exactly is causing it, but it is not good at the moment. Until then, this is Jonathan M. Ruggiero from the Magnolia Media Podcast saying to you all, be well.